The history of war is always about money. We are taught that ideology causes global conflict. We believe that evil dictators operate on hatred. But hatred is a very expensive political commodity. You cannot build tanks with angry political speeches. You cannot feed soldiers with racist propaganda pamphlets. War requires an absolute ocean of hard currency. The German Nazi regime faced a mathematical impossibility. They wanted to conquer the entire European continent. But the German state was absolutely, totally bankrupt. The Treaty of Versailles had destroyed their economy. The international community strictly banned German military rearmament. Foreign inspectors watched every single German industrial factory. If Germany built weapons, the world would know. If Germany printed money, hyperinflation would return instantly. The terrible trauma of 1923 remained. Citizens still remembered the massive wheelbarrows of cash. Adolf Hitler needed a massive, secret financial miracle. He needed to build a terrifying war machine. And he needed to do it completely invisibly. Enter a brilliant, incredibly cynical man named Schacht. Hjalmar Schacht was the president of the Reichsbank. He was a ruthless genius of central banking. He did not wear a classic military uniform. He wore tailored suits and completely manipulated ledgers. Schacht understood that traditional finance could not work. The national budget was public and carefully monitored. He needed a completely invisible parallel banking system. So Schacht invented the greatest fraud in history. The company was called Metallurgische Forschungsgesellschaft, or MEFO. It translates roughly to Metallurgical Research Corporation today. The name sounded completely harmless, dull, and scientific. But MEFO did absolutely no metallurgical research whatsoever. It had no factories, no workers, no products. It was just a quiet, empty office space. It was a dummy corporation built on paper. Four major German industrial titans funded the company. Krupp, Siemens, Rheinmetall, and Gut-Hoffnungsstadt provided the capital. But their initial investment was almost laughably small. The true power of MEFO was completely hidden. The German government secretly guaranteed all MEFO operations. When the military ordered new tanks or bombers, they did not pay the contractors with cash. The government simply did not have the cash. Instead, they paid the contractors with MEFO bills. A MEFO bill was essentially a corporate IOU. It was a promise to pay money later. The bills earned a steady 4% interest. This made them incredibly attractive to corporate executives. Instead of cashing them, companies held the bills. They traded MEFO bills among themselves like cash. A shadow currency was born in the dark. This shadow currency circulated entirely outside the banks. It never appeared on the official government budget. It never appeared in the public inflation statistics. The international community was completely, absolutely fooled forever. Foreign diplomats looked at the official German budget. The official budget showed a peaceful, recovering economy. The official budget showed absolutely no military spending. But in reality, the war machine was roaring. Factories ran day and night producing heavy artillery. Shipyards built massive submarines under the dark cover. Aviation companies designed deadly bombers for the Luftwaffe. Millions of German workers finally found steady employment. The horrific unemployment of the Depression quickly vanished. Hitler was celebrated as an absolute economic genius. The German public believed a true miracle happened. They saw new highways, new cars, new jobs. They did not see the massive, hidden debts. They did not realize their prosperity was fake. The entire Nazi recovery was a Ponzi scheme. Schacht knew this artificial system was highly dangerous. MEFO bills were originally designed as temporary measures. They were supposed to last only 6 months. But the government constantly extended their maturity dates. 6 months became a year, then 5 years. The volume of hidden debt grew absolutely exponentially. By 1938, the numbers were terrifying. Over 12 billion marks existed as MEFO bills. This was an incomprehensible, completely unpayable financial sum. It was larger than the entire national revenue. Hjalmar Schacht finally realized the game was over. He looked at the secret, catastrophic financial ledgers. He knew the German economy was fundamentally bankrupt. He officially warned Hitler to stop military spending. He demanded a return to sane financial policies. He warned that hyperinflation would destroy the state. Hitler responded to this warning with absolute fury. Dictators do not accept mathematical or financial limits. Hitler aggressively fired Schacht from the central bank. He replaced him with loyal, unquestioning party members. The German government faced an absolutely terrifying reality. The massive MEFO bills were finally coming due. Contractors were demanding actual, physical cash for them. If the government printed cash, inflation would explode. If the government defaulted, the economy would crash. The military-industrial complex would instantly go bankrupt. The illusion of Nazi prosperity would completely shatter. The regime was trapped in an inescapable corner. They had literally spent their way into oblivion. There was only one possible violent way out. When an empire cannot pay its internal debts, it must aggressively loot the wealth of others. War was no longer just an ideological desire. War became a strict, absolute, mathematical economic necessity. Germany had to expand to steal foreign capital. They absorbed Austria to steal its gold reserves. They dismantled Czechoslovakia to seize its heavy industry. But even the stolen wealth was not enough. The black hole of MEFO debt consumed everything. The Nazi war machine was an insatiable monster. It had to keep moving to survive bankruptcy. In September 1939, they invaded Poland. The Second World War officially and violently began. It was triggered by a hidden financial crisis. The deadliest war originated inside a fake corporation. Millions died because a central banker forged ledgers. The Holocaust, the bombings, the endless muddy trenches. They were financed by an illegal shadow currency. The MEFO bills represent the ultimate state deception. They prove that economic fraud causes global slaughter. When governments hide their spending from the public, they are usually preparing to sacrifice the public. Transparency is the only true defense against tyranny. Secret budgets inevitably lead to secret military operations. And secret military operations always lead to war. The German citizens never voted for this debt. They simply cheered for the artificial economic boom. They enjoyed the employment generated by the fraud. But the bill was eventually paid in blood. The debt was settled in the ruined cities. Berlin was reduced to smoking, radioactive, twisted rubble. The financial reckoning destroyed the entire European continent. This is the true legacy of Hjalmar Schacht. He weaponized the complex mechanics of central banking. He turned dry accounting into an apocalyptic weapon. He proved that financial lies can kill millions. The Allies eventually discovered the massive MEFO fraud. During the Nuremberg trials, the truth was revealed. Schacht was tried for his dark economic crimes. He claimed he only wanted to save Germany. He claimed he never actually wanted global war. But his financial architecture made the war possible. Without the MEFO bills, Hitler was completely powerless. Without the secret currency, rearmament was physically impossible. The tanks would have remained unbuilt paper blueprints. The bombers would have never left the factories. Finance is the silent engine of every empire. It dictates the absolute boundaries of military ambition. The Nazis tried to cheat the economic laws. They built a terrifying superpower on fake money. But the laws of mathematics are absolutely unforgiving. You can hide inflation for a few years. You can hide sovereign debt from foreign diplomats. But eventually, the entire artificial structure collapses violently. The fake prosperity burns away in the fire, leaving only the ashes of a destroyed nation. This terrifying history remains incredibly relevant right now. Modern governments still use complex tricks to borrow. They still hide massive debts through creative accounting. They still fund massive militaries with printed money. They still promise endless prosperity without any sacrifice. The mechanisms are different, but the danger remains. Unbacked spending always leads to inflation or war. Usually, it tragically leads to both of them. We must carefully study the dark MEFO deception. We must recognize the signs of artificial booms. When an economy relies entirely on military contracts. When a government actively hides its true obligations. The path to geopolitical disaster is already paved. The ghosts of the Weimar Republic are watching. They whisper warnings from the dark historical archives. They tell us to follow the hidden money, because the hidden money always leads to blood. The true origin of the Second World War is written entirely in the secret MEFO ledgers. He needed currency that officially did not exist. He created a fake company with boring names. Contractors accepted these bills because the state guaranteed. Contractors accepted bills because the government guaranteed them. It was built upon an exploding mountain debt. The explosive inflation was trapped behind a dam. But firing the accountant cannot erase the debt. The MEFO scheme was fundamentally incredibly highly illegal. It directly violated international treaties and basic laws. But the German people were incredibly desperate then. They willingly traded their freedom for economic stability. They ignored the aggressive military buildup around them, because they finally had food on their tables. This is the dangerous, seductive power of fascism. Provides short-term relief for long-term. Provides short-term relief for long terms. Provides short-term relief for long destruction. Provides short-term gains for long disaster. The central bank became a weapon of war. Schacht manipulated the currency like a master chessman. He created multiple exchange rates for different countries. He forced foreign nations to buy German goods. He established complex barter systems across Eastern Europe. He bypassed the global gold standard completely successfully. This isolated the German economy from global markets. But it made the country dependent on conquest. Autarky was the ultimate, overarching economic philosophy there. Autarky means total and absolute national self-sufficiency. But Germany lacked the necessary physical raw materials. They lacked rubber, oil, iron, and precious metals. They could not survive without importing these resources. The MEFO bills allowed them to buy time. But time was a very strictly limited commodity. The fake currency could only circulate so long. Eventually, someone would demand real, physical gold payment. When that happened, the illusion would completely shatter. Hitler understood this terrifying deadline perfectly and clearly. He told his generals to prepare for war. The German army had to be completely ready. They had to strike before the economy collapsed. The military expansion was driven by pure panic. Every new tank built required more MEFO bills. Every new bomber built increased the hidden debt. The cycle of fraudulent borrowing accelerated completely uncontrollably. By 1939, the system was failing. Taxes were aggressively raised on the German citizens. Price controls were strictly enforced by the police. Wages were frozen to prevent immediate consumer inflation. The government confiscated private wealth to survive daily. Jewish citizens were heavily, brutally, and systematically robbed. Their assets were stolen to fund the state. This horrific theft temporarily delayed the inevitable bankruptcy. But even state-sponsored robbery was not enough. The financial black hole demanded infinitely more capital. So the German army marched across the borders. They physically looted the central banks of Europe. They stole gold from Vienna, Prague, and Warsaw. They shipped the stolen wealth back to Berlin. This stolen gold temporarily supported the German currency. It allowed the Nazi regime to purchase imports. The war was a massive, violent looting operation. It was a pirate economy built on conquest. If the conquest stopped, the German state died. This explains the relentless, aggressive expansion of Germany. They could not stop fighting or they bankrupt. They could not stop fighting or they collapsed. The MEFO bills forced them to conquer everything. The secret currency became a terrifying, unstoppable monster. It devoured the entire continent of Europe eventually. This is why economic history is absolutely crucial. It reveals the true motivations behind geopolitical events. It exposes the cold calculations behind human suffering. Ideologies are often just excuses for economic necessities. Leaders use propaganda to justify their financial crimes. They convince citizens to die for their ledgers. The soldiers believe they fight for their nation. In reality, they fight to balance the books. The MEFO fraud illustrates this dynamic perfectly clearly. A few bankers in suits caused a holocaust. A fake corporation funded a real global slaughter. The contrast between paper lies and physical death. It is the most disturbing paradox of history. We must study the mechanisms of state finance. We must understand how governments generate military capital. Because when the money is printed in secret, the weapons are always deployed in the dark. The victims are always the innocent civilian populations. The perpetrators usually escape the most severe consequences. Schacht lived a long, comfortable life after war. He wrote books defending his cynical financial policies. He claimed he was a victim of Hitler, but he provided the financial blueprint for tyranny. He built the engine that drove the tanks. History has largely forgotten his terrible, quiet crimes. We focus on the generals and the dictators. We ignore the accountants who made it possible. The banality of evil exists in the spreadsheets. It exists in the quiet manipulation of interest. It exists in the creation of dummy corporations. The MEFO story is a permanent, chilling warning. It warns us about the dangers of fiat. It warns us about the secrecy of government. When transparency dies, freedom dies shortly after it. The public must demand absolute accountability regarding debt, because unchecked sovereign debt always leads to destruction. It leads to hyperinflation, authoritarianism, and eventually war. This is the undeniable cycle of human history. The Weimar Republic collapsed because of visible debt. The Third Reich collapsed because of hidden debt. Both systems failed to respect fundamental economic laws. Both systems brought apocalyptic suffering to the world. Let us remember the tragedy of the MEFO. Let us remember the deadly cost of deception. Let us never allow secret money to rule. Because secret money always buys a secret war. And secret wars always result in public slaughter. The blood of millions stains the MEFO ledgers. The ink is black, but the reality red. This concludes the investigation into Hitler's secret currency. We have exposed the financial roots of evil. We have traced the hidden money behind destruction. May this knowledge prevent future geopolitical financial crimes. May we always recognize the signs of fraud. The financial manipulation was a masterpiece of deception. It allowed a bankrupt nation to build armies. The sheer scale of the fraud is breathtaking. Historians often struggle to explain the rapid rearmament. They look at industrial capacity and political will. But they miss the crucial financial mechanism completely. The MEFO bills provided the necessary liquid capital. They functioned as a massive, hidden credit card. The German state maxed out this credit card. And then they used the military to steal. They stole resources to pay the minimum balance. This is the fundamental economic truth of fascism. It requires constant aggressive expansion to avoid collapse. A static fascist economy will inevitably destroy itself. The internal contradictions are mathematically impossible to resolve. The civilian population must be heavily, continually suppressed. Their wages must be stolen to fund weapons. Their consumer goods must be sacrificed for tanks. Eventually, the domestic population will reach breaking point. Unless the regime can provide stolen foreign wealth. Looting provides a temporary, highly deceptive economic boost. It placates the hungry citizens for a moment. It pays the restless soldiers their monthly wages. But the stolen wealth is quickly consumed again. The military-industrial machine is a hungry beast. It demands more steel, more oil, more blood. So the next invasion becomes a mathematical necessity. The borders must expand to acquire new victims. This predatory economic model defined the Third Reich. The MEFO bills were the original sin here. They allowed the regime to bypass democratic approval. If the government openly raised taxes for war, the citizens would have violently rejected the politicians. The people did not want another European slaughter. They still remembered the horrors of the trenches. But the secret currency bypassed the public completely. The rearmament happened quietly, safely behind closed doors. By the time the public realized the truth, it was already too late to stop it. The military was too powerful, the state totalitarian. The economic trap had fully and violently closed. The citizens were hostages to their own debt. This demonstrates the vital importance of financial transparency. When money is hidden, intentions are also hidden. The budget is a reflection of national priorities. A secret budget means secret, highly dangerous priorities. Schacht knew exactly what he was doing then. He was not an innocent, naive financial clerk. He was a highly intelligent, deeply cynical architect. He designed the weapon that destroyed the world. He handed a loaded gun to a madman. He believed he could control the political consequences. He thought he could manage the massive debt. He thought he could restrain the military ambition. This was the ultimate, arrogant mistake of elites. They believe they can control the radical forces. They believe they can manage the extremist politicians. But radicalism always eventually consumes its original creators. The financial engineers are always the first victims. When the debt becomes too massive to manage, the politicians simply discard the brilliant, cautious accountants. They replace them with blindly loyal, fanatic zealots. This happened exactly when Schacht was violently fired. Hitler replaced him with men who printed endlessly. They printed money until the paper was worthless. They printed money until the cities were destroyed. The transition from cautious fraud to absolute madness. This transition is the hallmark of falling empires. When reality becomes unbearable, leaders embrace total delusion. They believe their own incredibly toxic economic propaganda. They ignore the desperate warnings of the markets. They march confidently toward the edge of cliffs. The MEFO story is the ultimate economic tragedy. It shows how brilliant minds serve dark purposes. It shows how abstract financial concepts cause death. A simple piece of paper can destroy millions. A hidden ledger entry can level a city. This connection between finance and violence is profound. We separate economics from military history too often. We study them as distinct, totally unrelated subjects. But they are deeply, intimately, and permanently intertwined. You cannot understand the war without the money. You cannot understand the money without the war. The MEFO bills are the ultimate missing link. They connect the bankrupt Weimar Republic to war. They bridge the gap between defeat and aggression. They explain the inexplicable rise of the military. Let us examine the mechanics of the deception. The four massive corporations acted as a shield. They gave the fake company a legitimate appearance. Foreign observers saw respected industrial names on paper. They assumed the financial transactions were completely normal. They assumed it was standard civilian corporate borrowing. They did not look deeply into the ledgers. They wanted to believe the German economy recovered. The global markets desperately needed a stable Germany. So they willingly ignored the obvious, terrifying red. They ignored the massive increase in heavy manufacturing. They ignored the sudden lack of consumer goods. Willful ignorance is a powerful force in geopolitics. Nations see what they desperately want to see, until the reality violently crashes through the door. The reality of the German military crashed violently. It crashed through the borders of peaceful nations. It crashed through the illusions of European peace. The MEFO bills had finally purchased their objective. They had purchased the most destructive military machine. And the world paid the ultimate bloody price. The legacy of this secret currency remains dark. It serves as a stark warning for today. Modern economies are built on massive, complex debt. Central banks manipulate currencies with unprecedented global power. They create trillions of dollars from thin air. They use this money to fund massive states. The risks of hyperinflation still threaten us constantly. The risks of military expansion still loom globally. We must demand absolute transparency from our leaders. We must never allow secret budgets to exist. When governments hide money, they are hiding truth. They are preparing for actions the public rejects. The MEFO bills teach us to be vigilant. They teach us to question the official statistics. When economic miracles appear, we must look closer. We must search for the hidden toxic liabilities. Because miracles do not exist in mathematical finance. Every artificial boom is followed by devastating bust. Every hidden debt must eventually be fully repaid. The repayment often comes in unexpected, horrific forms. Sometimes it is paid through severe domestic poverty. Sometimes it is paid through devastating global warfare. The German people learned this lesson too late. They enjoyed the temporary prosperity of the 30s. They drove on the new, massive Autobahn highways. They ignored the factories producing heavy artillery shells. They believed the state would protect their savings. They trusted the charismatic leader and his bankers. Their trust was rewarded with absolute, utter ruin. Their cities were reduced to smoking toxic ash. Their nation was divided by foreign military powers. This was the final cost of the MEFO. This was the true price of the rearmament. It was the most expensive fraud in history, a fraud that cost 50 million human lives, a fraud that permanently scarred the human conscience. Let us never forget the mechanics of deception. Let us remember the name of Hjalmar Schacht, the banker who quietly financed the global apocalypse, the man who turned paper into heavy tanks. His story is essential for understanding the past. It is crucial for surviving the dangerous future. The global financial system remains incredibly, deeply fragile. It relies entirely on trust and perceived stability. When that trust evaporates, the entire structure crumbles. The MEFO bills were a massive breach trust. They infected the global economy with a lie. That lie festered and grew into a monster. The monster consumed the architects who created it, and it consumed the innocent civilians who watched. This concludes the deep dive into secret currency. We have explored the hidden economics of war. We have exposed the financial roots of fascism. The ledger is closed, but the lesson remains. The devastating consequences of this hidden financial mechanism echo powerfully through the dark halls of history. We see the echoes in modern defense budgets. We see the shadows in contemporary monetary policies. The temptation to print secret money never disappears. It is the ultimate forbidden fruit for politicians. It promises unlimited power without immediate political consequences. It allows leaders to bypass the angry taxpayers. But the laws of economics are completely ruthless. They always demand a strict and final accounting. The balance sheet must eventually be fully reconciled. If not with gold, then with human blood. The MEFO bills stand as the ultimate example. A monument to the catastrophic dangers of hubris. A warning against the dark arts of finance. Let the ruined cities of Europe bear witness. Let the silent graves of millions speak loudly. They demand that we understand how they died. They demand that we expose the financial mechanisms. Because those who control the secret, hidden money are the ones who truly control the world. They decide when the peace will finally end. They decide when the terrible slaughter will begin. This is the terrifying reality of global power. It operates in the deep, obscure financial shadows. Far away from the noble speeches of politicians. Far away from the patriotic parades of soldiers. The truth resides in the cold, mathematical ledgers, where human lives are reduced to simple numbers, where war is calculated as a profitable investment. This knowledge is our only defense against them. We must carefully study the archives of power. We must question every massive sudden economic boom. True wealth is built through productive, peaceful labor. It is never built through secret military expansion. The German experiment proved this beyond any doubt. The artificial prosperity vanished like smoke in wind. The citizens woke up to a terrifying nightmare. Their savings were completely gone without a trace. Their children were drafted into an endless war. Their homes were targeted by massive bomber fleets. This was the terrible interest on the MEFO. The compound interest of deception is always fatal. The financial wizards escaped the most severe punishments. They retired to quiet, comfortable lives in wealth. The ordinary people suffered the most agonizing consequences. This incredible injustice repeats throughout our human history. The elites construct the complex, fragile financial traps. The common citizens blindly walk directly into them. We must break this horrific cycle of deception. Education is the only antidote to financial tyranny. We must understand the language of the bankers. We must decode the complex jargon of state. When they say quantitative easing, we must watch. When they say special vehicles, we must question. MEFO was just an early version of this. It was a special purpose vehicle for war. It was quantitative easing for the military machine. The terminology changes, but the deadly mechanics remain. The printing of unbacked money is a theft. It steals the purchasing power from the poor. It transfers that wealth to the state apparatus. It enriches the contractors who build the weapons. This silent theft funded the entire Nazi regime. Without it, the fascist state would have starved. The global economy would have completely isolated them. Their terrible ambitions would have remained dark fantasies. But the secret currency gave the fantasy life. It breathed dark fire into the dying nation. And the fire eventually consumed the entire world. Let the ashes of Europe serve as evidence. Let the ruined economies of the past speak. They demand our attention and our utmost vigilance. We cannot allow another secret currency to rise. We cannot allow another hidden debt to explode. The future of global peace depends on transparency. The truth must shine on the financial ledgers. The shadows must be completely eradicated and destroyed. Only then can we prevent the next slaughter. The ghosts of the MEFO bills are restless. They warn us of the impending financial doom. Listen to their warnings before it is late. The cost of ignorance is simply too high. The price of deception is always human blood. We must never pay that terrible price again. The bills earned a steady 4% interest. This made them incredibly attractive to corporate executives. Instead of cashing them, companies held the bills. They traded MEFO bills among themselves like cash. A shadow currency was born in the dark. This shadow currency circulated entirely outside the banks. It never appeared on the official government budget. It never appeared in the public inflation statistics. The international community was completely, absolutely fooled forever. Foreign diplomats looked at the official German budget. The official budget showed a peaceful, recovering economy. The official budget showed absolutely no military spending. But in reality, the war machine was roaring. Factories ran day and night producing heavy artillery.